Welcome to the CEC Report for the 13th of March 2015. I'm Elisa Barwick, and with me is CEC leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Elisa.
And on today's report, Greece should knock out the structures propping up London and Wall Street and join the BRICS. And lack of vision, not lack of budget surpluses, driving Australia's intergenerational decline. So firstly, Greece should knock out the structures propping up London and Wall Street and join the BRICS. So we're going to update you on the situation in BRICS right now because there's a real standoff underway where Greece will not back down on further bailouts and further austerity, but at the same time the European financial authorities will not budge an inch either. Now, Greece and Cyprus have been excluded by the just announced quantitative easing program, which is a new addition of money into the European banking system of 1.14 trillion euro. And what's interesting is that the meeting to announce this was held in Nicosia, Cyprus, the European Central Bank meeting. And of course, given that Cyprus and Greece were excluded, there were quite large protests out the front of that event. Now, in addition to that announcement that Greece and Cyprus are excluded from those monies, last week Greece requested a €2 billion increase in the emergency liquidity assistance ceiling that they get from the ECB in order to offset deposit flight and to keep their banks afloat. Now, the ECB granted only €500 million out of the €2 billion request, and it's already been exhausted. So Greece refuses to extend the bailout or increase it in any way, and the European Central Bank has refused access and put restrictions on any other of the regular liquidity operations, for example the Hellenic Financial Stability Fund. So Greece is completely in a bind here. And also to keep pressure up on Greece, the ECB is holding weekly emergency sessions now, it was fortnightly before, to review the Greek situation at their headquarters in Frankfurt. So the real issue though is not a shortage of money. It's not that ECB doesn't have the money to help Greece. They've got this quantitative easing, and in fact they don't even have enough European government debt or bonds of euro area banks to spend it on. So they have to spend it overseas, invest it elsewhere, which is not helping Europe at all. So this is in fact strategic warfare against Greece. It's not about the money. And the reason for the warfare is that Greece will not budge on demanding three key things: a dramatic restructuring and reduction of its debt, an end to brutal austerity policies that are killing their population, and they're also demanding that Europe launch a new deal and put funds into building infrastructure. And bear in mind, in the question of repaying the debt that they owe, only about 3% of the money that went to bail out Greece actually stayed in Greece. The rest all flowed through to the big international banks, which were actually being bailed out by these bailouts.
Which is what Greece is now objecting to, right? They want the money to come into Greece to develop Greece instead of just going straight through them and back into the banks.
Well, that's right.
That's why they're saying no to bailout. They're not going to bail out the banks based upon the Greek people and their austerity. They want the money to come into the Greek economy, but the ECU is saying, no, we're not going to do that. You've got to bail out the banks first. Exactly. Which is what this is, quantitative easing is all about.
That's right. And because so little of the money came to them, they want the debt reduced. They shouldn't have to pay it back. They didn't get it. But the head of the European Stability Mechanism, Klaus Regling, just said, Greece must repay these loans entirely. That's what we expect, and nothing has changed in this regard. So the European financiers are holding line because they need to keep the status quo. Basically, if Greece were to leave the euro, that would crash the system. If Greece were to have its debt reduced, that would crash the system. So they need the status quo. It's a classic standoff. Neither are backing down. But Craig, Greece does actually have an ace up its sleeve. What does Greece need to do here?
Well, there's two things it can do. First of all, it has to move towards a Glass-Steagall banking system announcement. That is to basically say, look, this system's bankrupt, it's been proven, so let's go with Glass-Steagall. But secondly, as part of Glass-Steagall, once you get Glass-Steagall, let's go with the BRICS countries. Now, the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, they are joined together around a new idea, And that idea is the idea that they want to be sovereign. They want a system of financial agreements amongst themselves that protect the sovereignty of their own country but develop the physical economy of their country, which is what Greece is crying out for. Now, the BRICS countries can't do that without looking at a global Glass-Steagall process as well. But so the two solutions go hand in hand. The Glass-Steagall for the reorganisation of the bankrupt banking system, and joining the BRICS that have a new idea of protecting sovereignty, developing the nations around real large-scale infrastructure development projects. And amongst the BRICS countries, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of bilateral agreements that have been struck. You know, China, Russia, China, Brazil, Russia, South Africa, and so forth, about developing the elements of their real basic economic infrastructure. And basic economic infrastructure is things like electricity, you know, for power consumption, water projects, transportation, right? In some cases, education, right? And health, right? Very important. There's a health aspect of it too. That's what basic economic infrastructure is. Anything else that the government invests in has to be classed as speculation, because it is not lifting up the basic physical economy of the nation. And I know that Mr. LaRouche, as a physical economist, said something in the vicinity of 50% of a government's budget should be in basic economic infrastructure. 50%. What does our government today spend on basic economic infrastructure? Not 50%. A much, much smaller proportion.
If any. And the other thing about Greece joining the BRICS is that it's safety, a certain question of safety in numbers, because alone they will be crushed. So if they do align with countries, major power blocks like Russia and China and India, that makes a significant difference. And
I just was going to say, Elisa, see, the BRICS came about with a real force after the global financial crisis, because what these countries said, well, let's model this financial system, this transatlantic banking system centred on the City of London and Wall Street, is bankrupt. And they looked at what Obama did in bailing out the banks, the TARP approach with, you know, trillions of dollars literally going into the banks. I mean, you know, printing money like this doesn't mean necessarily that the physical economy is going to grow. That's what hasn't happened in the United States. The reality is that money's been printed, it's bought up all the toxic debt from derivatives, collateralized debt obligations and everything that caused the problem. Money's gone into the banks, but that money hasn't gone out of the banks.
No, and
it's
the lending,
stayed put.
you can see graphs of this where the lending into actual commercial activity and business activity has decreased on behalf of the banks.
And that's just the difference between the BRICS countries and what's been taking place with this quantitative easing, is the BRICS want to create the mechanisms, the financial mechanisms, the institutions, to actually lend that money, use that money, that credit, into the physical economy, create things with it that support the economies. A fundamentally different idea than what you've got with the quantitative easing.
And there's a number of people, figures and prominent journalists who have called in the last week or so for Greece or for Europe as an entirety to join with the BRICS. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. Well, the Greek Foreign Minister, for one, Nikos Kotzias, has urged for Greece and Cyprus to be a bridge between Europe and Russia as well as the BRICS. And he talked about the historical connections with China. China in Asia and Greece in Europe for 3,000 to 4,000 years were the two big civilizations. And of course, Russia, with which they've had deep historical, cultural and religious ties. Then you had German sociologist Professor Wolfgang Streeck, who emphasised that Russia could work with Greece to establish a bridgehead in Europe and the West. French founder of the Euro-China Forum urged Europe not to miss the historic opportunity to share in developing the common destiny of Eurasians as a strategic horizon. An anti-austerity Spanish think tank, the ECI Centre, said that Germany and France at bottom wish to join the BRICS anti-oligarchic dynamic of progress, but they're just worried about the consequences from Wall Street. And the Brazilian journalist Pepe Escobar said Germany has no choice but to join the BRICS if it is to survive the empire of chaos drive for war. And he noted that the acronym that all these forecasts dare not reveal is BRICS. BRICS is worse than the plague as far as the masters of the universe that really control the current rigged world system are concerned. And you can find out more details of all of that in our Australian Alert Service if you contact us for a free copy. We'll stop there for a moment, but after the break we're going to continue talking about this subject. Welcome back to the CEC Report. So we're talking about Greece aligning with the BRICS bloc of nations. Now, the key thing that the BRICS are thinking about and are aiming for is the necessity, urgently, for a new financial system, because as we can see, the current financial system is shot and it's unfixable. And in fact, the collapse of that system, while nothing's being done about it, is what is causing virtually all of the problems that we're facing in the world today, from the economic problems, from this confrontation that Greece is facing, for example, to the drive for war. That's the whole point. Now, the good news with the BRICS is that there's a trio of funds, of new development banks, that should all be up and running the way things are going by the end of the year. The New Development Bank is the first one, which has been ratified. The instruments for it have been ratified by the parliaments of Russia, and Putin signed on to that, off on that law now, and India and the others are yet to do that. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the New Silk Road Development Bank. So they should all be functioning to begin to put out the funding for development projects so that nations can completely bypass the IMF World Bank system, which is just stopping any capability of development by the end of the year. Now, what that will unleash is a very fast motion and building of the Eurasian land bridge, or the worldwide land bridge. And China, for one, has just declared over the last week that this is their top priority. The Chinese Foreign Minister, Wang Yi, said that this idea of one belt, one road, which is essentially the Silk Road economic belt, uniting Europe, Russia, Asia, is the top priority and the main focus of Chinese foreign policy in 2015. And it's an inclusive policy. It's designed to bring anyone in who wants to be involved, including the maritime Silk Road belt. And he said, one belt, one road should be seen as a symphony with the parts being performed by all the relevant countries. Numerous other Chinese leaders in various events over the last week have stated the same exact policy. And it's interesting to see, actually, that, the New York Times had a major piece that painted the president of China, Xi Jinping, as the new Mao Zedong, and showing these trinkets of Xi Jinping behind all these other trinkets of Mao Zedong, that he's been treated as a cult figure. And you're beginning to get the same line also about Narendra Modi, as you are with Putin. So the propaganda campaign is beginning in earnest on that. But I wanted to ask you, Craig, if Greece were to announce they were aligning with the BRICS nations, given what the BRICS are doing here, what they're planning, what effect do you think this would have in the transatlantic region?
Oh, it would be earth-shattering, Elisa, but whether we hear about it down here would be another matter, because as we've seen, discussion about the BRICS is very, very quiet. You think about it, here we have the Chinese foreign minister and the Chinese nation announcing one road, one belt, development. What do we hear from the other side? Terrorism and war, right?
Austerity.
So, austerity, terrorism and war. So here you have the optimistic program of the likes of China and the BRICS countries, as opposed to the collapse and war of the transatlantic system. Now, the actual power of this exists in the BRICS countries. So if Greece comes along and says, well, look, this system, emperor's got no clothes, this system is finished. Let's be real here. The guy's naked, the system's naked. Let's join something that's actually moving here. That's going to have an earth-shattering effect.
And if they have the courage to do that, you would then immediately have countries like, Italy, which has been crushed, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, who is just, begging for something like this. And a lot of those nations, there is a discussion about what the BRICS are doing and about exiting the euro.
It's just below the surface of becoming a global, well, it's a global paradigm now. It's just not being openly discussed because of the terror and the threat this represents for the existing collapsing world monetary system under the control of Britain, of the London Wall Street. That's what you see here. That's why the the drive towards war against Russia is becoming so fever pitched, is because they know their system is finished. So the control over the BRICS countries by the existing system is becoming paramount. That's why they're going to see all sorts of extra slanders coming between Modi and Zuma and Putin to continue and so forth. This is a death roll, you might say, by the transatlantic system.
Exactly.
And Australia, where's it? Oh, we're just sort of flopping around here, and here we are. We should be joining with the Australian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Australia is only one of 2 countries, Elisa, that has ever had a history of a national bank. If we go back and look at the Commonwealth Bank, you see how we can actually create the credits necessary to internally fund our own development. How much we get involved with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank would be a function of that. That's what I believe. So, we need to join these other banks for the purposes of providing the necessary credits for the development of countries that haven't got any history of national banking and need to go through the classic models.
Absolutely. And the other thing I'll add just before we go to the break is that people should contact us for a free copy of this BRICS magazine, because in the back here there's a stunning section which is called LaRouche's 40-year record, a new international economic order, which goes through from the 1970s onwards everything that our international associates, our international organisation has done from through the 1970s, Lyndon LaRouche meeting with Indira Gandhi, meeting with President Lopez Portillo of Mexico, the non-aligned movement and our input into that, leading to the call for an international development bank, which was ultimately raised at the United Nations Forum, the work through the 1980s with Russia on the Strategic Defence Initiative, and coming through into the, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, to our advancement of the prospect of the Eurasian land bridge, LaRouche having multiple trips after that to Russia, Helga Zepp LaRouche's trips to China, and coming to the point now where the BRICS had really taken up the baton for that, as you mentioned, Craig, after the GFC, and particularly into 2012 and 2013. So we'll stop there, and after the break we're going to change the subject to our intergenerational lack of leadership. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Lack of vision, not lack of budget surpluses, driving Australia's intergenerational decline. So we saw the release of the intergenerational report this week, and on the 11th of March, the CEC put out a media release about that, which was headlined, and I think the headline tells a lot about it. Hockey's intergenerational report nightmare proves garbage in, garbage out. Transform the future through economic development. Now, these IGRs are projections of our socio-economic future for the next 4 decades, in case you didn't realise. And these are done every 5 years. So this one takes a look at what Australia is going to look like in 2054 to 2055. And it paints a grim picture, but not on the sorts of things that really are the big issues that we point out, such as the new GFC that's now coming on, war, etc. But it's basically a scare story to justify that we need austerity and to convince Australians that we need that austerity. So
to back up the budget that Hockey hasn't been able to jam down the throats of the Senate and the House of Representatives.
Exactly. So what they do is they show what the budget's going to look like under the existing budget policies, what it would look like if their budget was passed, and what it would look like, if everything they want is passed. But the things that are factors that they point out are the ageing population. They point out there'll be 40,000 people over the age of 100 by 2050, and more than half of those will need a part pension. And they say there's, of course, not enough super allocated, so there'll be a push to increase what they grab out of our wages every week. And they put a lot of emphasis on reducing reliance on the pension, so of course, getting rid of pensions. They talk about bracket creep, leading to half the workforce paying 45% of their wages to the Treasury. And they say the economy will stagnate unless we do what we have to do. They say that they forecast that without the cuts that the government is proposing, if those don't get passed, our debt is going to balloon out to 5.5 trillion by 40 years' time. But if the cuts they want are passed, that debt could be halved or even almost reduced if they get absolutely every cut that they're talking about. So it really is a scare story, and they play upon this figure of the 100 million a day that we're spending. At one point, they say the Australian government is currently spending over $100 million a day more than it collects and is borrowing to meet the shortfall. And later on they say once the budget returns to balance though, new debt issuance will no longer be needed to finance government activities. So they're basically making the point that paying off the debt is far more important. It's the most important thing, even if you're killing off the population, which compare this to the situation in Greece. Greece has just abandoned that, and here we are pursuing it pell-mell. But it reminds me of that other Liberal, Robert Menzies, who said in 1932, in opposition to Premier Jack Lang's debt moratorium, that he'd rather see every Australian die of starvation than fail to honour contractual debts with Britain. But the point is, debt is a very useful mechanism. It's not something you have to be fearful of, but it has to be used in the right way.
Well, that's the key, Lisa. You do have to be fearful of debt if you're using it to fund speculation.
Yeah,
right. I mean,
which is why we are where we are.
That's right. And look, the issue here is that this is absolute statistical mumbo jumbo, because what it's saying is on the current projections, if we don't change things, we are going to end up over here. But it doesn't take into account that there's a possibility that you can transform the system to be in a completely different way. Now,
exactly.
How do you do that? Well, for example, you have to state, well, we're not going to produce, we actually have to produce in this economy. We have to have people in high-paying jobs. How do we do that? Well, we need to go with, first of all, a Glass-Steagall reorganisation of the banking system, have a sound commercial banking system, get rid of the speculation, then let's go back to what we used to have in the form of a Commonwealth Bank as a national bank. Let's create the credits. Yes, okay, it's going to be in the form of a debt, but the credits can be then paid out over time if that money is spent into expanding the economic potential of the nation, into basic economic infrastructure, high-speed rail, water projects, allow people to produce, allow people to employ, instead of being swamped by cheap overseas imports. Bring back the necessary tariff restrictions. Oh, there's that terrible word. But the only way that you can protect the domestic economy is if you take measures in order to be able to allow the products that you produce to be consumed inside the economy. And the more and more and more you cut, as you get into the Great Depression cycle of deflation, where people can't afford to buy products, prices collapse, you can't reinvest in inventories, therefore people can't be employed because you can't sell goods, and you end in a downward spiral. When you create the credits necessary to fund the economy through large-scale infrastructure development, you put more people into work, you create the demand, therefore you create the ability to create more industries and so forth. That's what we need, more employment and so forth. So the idea, what I'm saying is that the idea that you can have a statistical correlation, draw a straight line to 50-50 or whatever it is, 20-50, is absolute insanity. We have the capacity to change things now, but it requires real vision and an understanding of what physical economy is as opposed to this monetarist economy. Yeah,
the real problem I think is we have a real intergenerational lack of vision in our leaders. And I want to end with a quote from Dr. John Bradfield, who we quoted in that media release, where he said, "The nation without vision perishes, but the heart and mind of any vigorous people responds to the dream of its national destiny and will endeavour to make full use of its heritage." So thanks for joining us again on the CEC Report, and we'll see you next week.